It happens in an instant. You step off a spinning ride. You roll over in bed. You look up at the ceiling. And suddenly, the world tilts. Not dramatically, not painfully, just enough to make you grab the nearest surface and wait for everything to settle back into place. Most people dismiss it within seconds. Almost nobody asks what just happened. And here is the first thing that will surprise you. In most cases, the world didn't move at all. Your brain just became uncertain about whether it had. And there is something even more striking than that. In many everyday situations, dizziness is not a sign that something is broken. It is your nervous system responding to conflicting sensory information and occasionally arriving at the wrong conclusion. So where does dizziness actually come from? And why does the brain sometimes lose its grip on something as fundamental as which way is up? To understand dizziness, you have to start somewhere most people would never think to look. Deep inside each ear, past the eardrum, past the structures responsible for hearing, sits a system that has nothing to do with sound. It is called the vestibular system. Housed within the inner ear on each side of the head, it consists of two main components: 3 fluid-filled semicircular canals oriented at different angles, and 2 small chambers called the utricle and the saccule. Together, they form one of the most precise motion detection systems in the body. The semicircular canals primarily detect rotational acceleration. When the head turns, the fluid inside shifts and bends tiny sensory hair cells lining the canal walls, generating signals that the brain uses to track angular motion. The utricle and saccule perform a different function. They detect linear acceleration and the direction of gravity using tiny calcium carbonate crystals, called otoliths, that shift position and bend their own set of hair cells in response to movement and gravitational pull. This system operates continuously, invisibly, and with extraordinary precision. And yet, it does not work alone.
Here is where the story becomes more interesting. The brain does not rely on the vestibular system by itself to maintain balance and orientation. It continuously integrates information from 3 separate sources: the vestibular system in the inner ear, the visual system, what your eyes are telling it about the world around you, and proprioception, the signals arriving from joints, muscles, and the skin that tell the brain where every part of the body is positioned in space. Under normal conditions, these 3 systems agree. The eyes confirm what the inner ear reports. The body's position matches what both are saying. The brain receives a consistent, coherent picture of the world, and balance feels effortless. Dizziness begins the moment that agreement breaks down.
Now, why does spinning make you dizzy? When you spin and then stop, the fluid inside the semicircular canals continues moving for a moment due to its own momentum. The hair cells are still detecting motion, still sending signals to the brain. But your eyes, fixed on a stationary environment, are reporting that you have stopped. The vestibular system and the visual system are sending contradictory information. The brain receives 2 conflicting reports about the same moment in time. And its response to that conflict, the sensation of dizziness, is not confusion. It is the brain's signal that something in the incoming data does not add up, and that caution is warranted until the signals realign. The world appears to spin not because it is, but because the brain is attempting to reconcile 2 conflicting streams of sensory information arriving at the same time, and producing the most plausible interpretation it can construct from them.
So why are neurologists interested in something that most people shake off in seconds? The answer is in what happens when the conflict doesn't resolve. The most common cause of recurring dizziness in clinical practice is a condition called benign paroxysmal positional vertigo, BPPV. It occurs when some of the calcium carbonate crystals in the utricle become dislodged and migrate into one of the semicircular canals, a place they are not supposed to be. Once there, they drift through the fluid when the head changes position, bending the sensory hair cells and generating signals that indicate head rotation, even though no rotation is actually occurring. The brain receives signals indicating head movement that no longer match the actual position of the head because the displaced otoliths continue stimulating the canal inappropriately.
Every time the head moves, those loose crystals continue drifting through the fluid, like tiny pebbles suspended in water, repeatedly bending the sensory hair cells and generating the same false signal until they finally settle. The result is a sudden, intense sensation of spinning, typically lasting less than a minute, triggered by specific head positions, such as lying down, rolling over, or looking upward. BPPV is considered benign because it is not caused by anything dangerous, but the dizziness it produces can be severe enough to cause falls and to significantly disrupt daily life. And here is what makes it particularly significant from a clinical perspective. It is one of the few vestibular conditions that responds reliably to a specific physical treatment, a series of precisely sequenced head movements called the Epley Maneuver, designed to guide the displaced crystals back out of the canal. In many cases, a correctly performed repositioning maneuver can resolve the dizziness within a single session. A problem caused by misplaced calcium crystals in the ear, resolved by moving the head in a specific sequence. That is the kind of precision that makes the vestibular system genuinely remarkable. And here is what makes dizziness particularly significant as a research model. Unlike many neurological symptoms, dizziness can be deliberately induced by spinning or by specific head positions and studied as it resolves in real time. What feels like a minor inconvenience after stepping off a carousel is, in a laboratory setting, a controlled demonstration of how the brain arbitrates between competing sensory sources and what happens when that arbitration fails.
Why doesn't everyone experience dizziness in the same situations or with the same intensity? Not everyone has the same susceptibility. Current evidence suggests that individual differences in vestibular sensitivity, the responsiveness of visual vestibular integration, and the brain's tolerance for sensory mismatch all contribute to why some people become dizzy in situations that others barely notice. Motion sickness, which shares the same underlying mechanism of sensory conflict, shows similar individual variation. There is also a well-documented relationship between migraine and vestibular dysfunction. Vestibular migraine, in which dizziness is a primary symptom rather than headache, is now recognized as one of the most common causes of recurrent dizziness in adults. The exact mechanisms linking migraine and vestibular processing remain under active investigation. But the pattern reinforces something important. What presents as a simple sensation of imbalance can reflect differences in how deeply the brain's orientation systems are connected to its broader sensory networks.
Return for a moment to where this began. The world didn't move. Your brain just became momentarily uncertain about whether it had. What you experience as dizziness is generated not by any single structure, but by a conflict between systems: the inner ear, the eyes, the body's position sensors, each sending accurate information about their own domain, and the brain struggling to reconcile reports that briefly do not match. It is a precise, involuntary demonstration of something worth understanding, that the experience of stability is not a passive state. It is something your brain actively constructs, moment by moment, from information it is continuously receiving and reconciling. When the signals agree, balance feels effortless. When they don't, the world tilts. And so, the next time the room suddenly seems to spin, you step off a ride. You roll over in bed and the world tilts without warning. You reach for the nearest surface and wait for everything to settle. 15 seconds, maybe 20, then it passes, the same way it always has. And now you know why. What felt like the world losing its balance was actually your brain attempting to reconcile signals that briefly refused to agree.
If you're curious about how your mind and our world really works, subscribe to Why Decoded. Because everything has a reason. We just haven't decoded all of them yet.